right now at the IMF and World Bank annual meetings. Calls for action as the week wraps up.
Let me start with some good news. Inflation is in retreat. Tight monetary policies have worked without breaking the back of the global economy. Big sense of relief. But not yet time for celebration. There is much work to do. To tackle today's global challenges, we need more than ever cooperation and multilateral action.
Economic growth in sub-Saharan Africa remains subdued, particularly in per capita terms.
Growth in the region is moderating, as most economies are operating back near their potential.
Are we in a better place today?
No, we should never be complacent or lazy. But I think we are in a better position. But we live in a more volatile and dangerous world.
We need to rebuild buffers in our economy. We need to face the future with this very firm structure.
We are in a better place, but going forward, we have to continue to learn, observe, adapt. This job is not done, but I have confidence that we're in the process of doing the best job possible.
Welcome to IMF Today. I'm Amanda Walker. As the 2024 annual meetings of the IMF and World Bank Group come to a close, one thing is increasingly clear. The political economy challenges are becoming more complex. These meetings are one way that countries can compare notes as they try to figure out the best paths forward for themselves. But turning the tide isn't always possible by yourself, and that's where these organizations can help. It's a point IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva drove home in today's annual meetings plenary.
We are the world's essential transmission line for the sharing of country experiences across our membership. We are the first responder in times of trouble. Countries know we are here to catch them if they fall, especially the poorest and most vulnerable. Strengthening the fund's lending role and precautionary credit facilities strengthens the global financial safety net. All countries stand to benefit because less instability means the whole world does better.
So what have the key takeaways been from this week and what's next? I spoke with IMF Communications Director Julie Kozack a little earlier today.
We have both good news and challenges. On the good news side, inflation is in retreat. And that has happened without tipping the global economy into recession. So that's the good news. But the challenges are really twofold. One is we have low growth, and the other is that we have high debt. So we have a low growth, high debt conundrum that we have to tackle starting now, but over the medium term. And what that means in terms of policies is that now with the fight against inflation making good progress, it's now the time to really start to tackle the fiscal challenges. So rebuilding those fiscal buffers. We're encouraging countries to start now with a credible medium-term consolidation plan. It's also the time to boost growth. We have a low growth environment. Now is the time for countries to take reforms that are going to increase growth and increase productivity. And then the third part is really about tackling the challenges that we can only tackle together.
So we're nearly at the end of the week. What would you say at this point your kind of takeaways are in terms of outcomes and policy decisions?
So there's a few that I think are worth highlighting. The first is that, the membership has really come together in a form of cooperation and a strong show of support for the IMF. And I'll just give the example of the two recent policy changes that we made, both to reduce our charges and surcharges, but also to have the membership come together in unanimity to support our low-income countries through reforms to our poverty reduction and growth trust. That's our lending instrument for low-income countries. So that really showed the spirit of cooperation and the sense of support for what we're doing here at the IMF. And maybe two other things worth mentioning are that the membership decided or is in the process of electing the third chair for Sub-Saharan Africa. This will give us three broader voice and representation for Africa on our executive board. And finally, we welcomed our 191st member, Liechtenstein, just this week.
That's right, yeah. So everybody's going to be heading home with those things in mind, but how do you ensure and what will your kind of top priorities be when it comes to making sure that everybody continues that progress in terms of the global membership in ongoing economically challenging times?
Well, it tells us that we, as usual after our meetings, after we take the deep breath and the sigh of relief, it's back to work, right? The membership is calling on us to continue our key functions, what we call surveillance or policy advice, both for individual countries and looking at the world as a whole with cross-country analysis. Our lending, there's a strong demand for our lending. We are at the center of what we call the global financial safety net. We're the world's emergency responder for countries when they fall into balance of payments need. And then the third, of course, is capacity development. This is where we really help our members help build those strong institutions, which give them resilience over time.
Okay. Julie, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
More than 20 countries have been able to boost their tax revenue by more than 5% of GDP in the past 3 decades with the help of the IMF. One of them is Jamaica, where the government was able to secure public support for a carefully designed package of reforms to protect public investment and social spending. As a result, the nation essentially halved its public debt in a decade. Joining me now is Nigel Clarke, Jamaica's Minister of Finance. Thank you so much for joining us, Minister. So what were the keys to cutting those public debt numbers, and what kind of advice can you give to other middle-income countries who might have elevated debt? What can you tell them about your experience to help them get out of that?
Well, for Jamaica's successful program engagement and the successes that you quoted in terms of debt reduction were achieved in the context of broad societal ownership and domestic oversight. This became Jamaica's program. This was something that Jamaicans wanted to do, and we had various elements of society come together, expressed in something that we called Economic Policy Oversight Committee, that provided fiscal transparency by reporting directly to the Jamaican people on the government's performance versus its commitment, and demonstrated the resolve that was needed to push on through. So domestic oversight was very important. The second factor would have been policy continuity. So across administrations, we've been able to keep focus on the broad contours of the macro-fiscal framework. Within the boundaries of that framework, political parties competed, did different things, had different priorities, but the broad contours were maintained. And so bipartisan support was very important for Jamaica. And then a third factor that I think has been quite decisive is we have made sure to focus on what I call the demonstrative effect, i.e. demonstrating that these policies are in the people's interest. By virtue of these policies, we're able to do things and have experiences that we never had before. For one, we've had consecutive periods of quarterly growth that exceeded what we'd experienced before. Before, our growth was unstable and volatile. Growth rates were low, but at least they were stable over time. We had, or experienced, record low unemployment rates. The unemployment rate would establish new historic record lows repeatedly. Before we started on this journey, the unemployment rate was about 16% back in 2013. By the time I became Ambassador of Economic Affairs, the unemployment rate was just about 14%. Today, it's 4.2%. Prior to the pandemic, it was a historic low of 7%. We thought that was great. Today, we're even lower than we were prior to the pandemic. And then the capital programs that we've been able to eventually do have exceeded our experience. To be able to take on highway projects without borrowing, to be able to do simple things like refleet the bus service or to begin the process of refleeting the bus service without borrowed funds. And at the same time, we're focused on introducing new products, broadening the social safety net, introducing a social pension. So just doing things that we haven't had before.
Okay.
And one of the biggest things would have been we're able to navigate this period without sort of the instability of new taxation on a periodic basis, which would have been a part of the Jamaican experience for about 30 years. And so being able to demonstrate to people that we're better off was a key part of sustaining consolidation over a long period of time. This was not just some academic thing, but it actually delivered for the Jamaican people.
Jamaica was, of course, one of the first countries to access the Resilience and Sustainability Facility. Tell me more about how the RSF helped Jamaica implement its climate policy agenda.
Yes.
What changes did that make on the ground?
So the RSF was instrumental as far as deepening Jamaica's policy framework around green financing and around climate financing. We did many things, but I'll mention just three. We were able to introduce into our public investment management appraisal process and our PPP process elements that ensure that projects are assessed from a sustainability and green perspective. We have been working on and are close to implementing a blue-green financing facility where the government will be able to crowd in green financing from partners around the world that will provide the opportunity for a blended approach to financing that's domesticated in Jamaica. Rather than having to go out on a project-by-project basis to access green financing funds, we'll be able to do it right there in Jamaica. And this will allow Jamaica to be able to bring projects that have sustainable features, that are green and actually better for the country. It will make the financing of those projects more feasible. The RSF was instrumental in that. And the third that I would mention is that Jamaica became the first country in the region to launch a green sort of taxonomy on the Jamaica Stock Exchange, i.e. to launch the framework that will allow investors, issuers to have confidence in bonds that emerge from Jamaica that have a green tag. Right? You will know what that means. And the RSF was instrumental in that. We got support from the IDB in it as well. And we expect that, with the public investment process that's green, the blue-green facility, and the green stock exchange, the green bond infrastructure that is Jamaica's stock exchange, that we will be able to bring projects to market that we would not otherwise have been able to. So in a single word, if you ask me or two words for the RSF, it's about crowding in.
Okay.
Yeah? The RSF has allowed us to put a policy framework in place that will enable us to crowd in financing for sustainable green projects that are better for Jamaica.
And just finally and briefly, if you will, you've had a great career spanning a lot of institutions. Your next stop is here, the IMF, Deputy Managing Director. What are you most looking forward to about that next chapter?
Well, over the past 8 years, I've had the opportunity to work with some amazing people across many teams, many departments here at the fund, and I've always been just amazed at the depth and the breadth of the talent that exists in this institution. I think it's incredible, and I am so much looking forward to getting to know people here and to working with them. and to being a part of what I think is an amazing and great team.
I'm sure we'll see you again on IMF Today. Thank you so much, Minister.
Thank you for having me, Amanda.
As Julie mentioned a few minutes ago, over the last 2 weeks, the IMF's Executive Board approved 2 historic reforms. One reduces the cost of borrowing, the first reduction in charges and surcharges in the fund's history. The second is a comprehensive reform and financing package that adds about $8 billion to the Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust over the next 5 years. The moves will help support low-income countries, which has been a key part of the conversations this week.
We do what we can to stabilize countries, and in some cases, there is progress. Take Somalia. Somalia was seen as sort of very difficult to pull out of the brink. Somalia is doing better.
It took Somalia years of sustained reform momentum to make progress. Let's take a closer look.
Somalia implemented close to 90 key reforms in its engagement with the IMF since 2016. And we at the IMF have been supporting Somalia through policy advice, financing, and capacity development support with the sponsorship of the Somalia Country Fund.
After 2 decades of conflict and instability, Somalia is working hard to rebuild state institutions. And the country has made remarkable progress in reforming key institutions that are essential to macroeconomic stability. One of the most notable achievements is the progress made by the Central Bank of Somalia, which transformed itself from primarily a bank for the government to become a modern, policy-oriented institution.
Somalia has seen an important increase in domestic revenues and social spending. The government went from spending an average of $8 per person to $48 in just 10 years. This means more social benefits, better education, and more opportunities for Somalis.
Social spending on essential basic public services like education remains a government priority. This is why we have recruited 3,000 teachers, and we are committed to recruiting even more in the 2024 budget.
Now, Bihi Iman Egeh is the Minister of Finance for the federal government of Somalia. You just saw him in that clip, and he joins me now. Thank you so much for your time, Minister. So Somalia has made some remarkable progress in increasing domestic revenues. What specific reforms or strategies have been most successful in achieving that growth?
Thank you so much for having me. Somalia has made a remarkable progress in enhancing domestic revenue over the last 2 years. The key reforms that we have undertaken were mainly concerning on revenue administration review, reforms that has to do with revenue administration, including digitalization. We have tried to benefit the potential of technology. So we have automated a number of revenue streams, including rental income tax, including road tax, including also sales tax. So this has simplified taxation processes, but they have also reduced the burdensome of taxpayers. This has also increased transparency around revenue collection. They have also created a sense of confidence in taxpayers. We have also engendered a comprehensive reforms on taxation. So we have introduced new policies. We have modernized our laws regarding on the taxation. So we have introduced, for instance, revenue administration law that is modern. We have also modernized our customs law. We've also introduced a number of regulations, including customs regulations law and revenue administration regulation law. So these together have improved our domestic revenue. So just to give you a number, our domestic revenue has increased more than 56% over the last two years. So this has been mainly the driving reforms.
And it's really life-changing stuff, isn't it? As we saw in that video, the IMF has played a key role in Somalia's debt relief and economic restructuring. And in that video, you talked about hiring 3,000 teachers. What kind of impact does that have on the ground in Somalia? I mean, it must be totally life-changing for so many people.
You know, coming from a long period of state collapse, those public services has been absent in Somalia over the last 2 decades. So when the government was resurrected, we have embarked on those drastic reforms guided by the IMF program. So these have created new fiscal space. So in terms of increasing social spending, I think there are 3 key things that has allowed us to increase our spending. One is prudent expenditure review frameworks that has been supported by the IMF, that engendered fiscal discipline. Also, increase of domestic revenue has allowed us to have more spending on education, on health. These reforms also unlock new financing from international financial institutions. So together, these have created space for education. That's why we have recruited 6,000 teachers. So with this, we have increased our our education spending from 3% to 10% of the. This has been life-changing. Our enrollment rate has increased. We have also reached to new places that has not been reached by the government over the last 3 years, because we are also fighting with terrorists. So we were liberating new areas. So these new liberated areas are now benefiting from this enhanced coverage of the government in terms of provision of social services and public goods.
Okay, Minister, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
2024 marks 80 years since the Bretton Woods Conference that ended with the establishment of the International Monetary Fund. It's been a year of celebration and reflection on the role of the fund around the world. One of the events this week unveiled an exhibit called Decades of Delivery. This work was the result of a collaboration between the fund and the London College of Communication. Their design students were asked to visualize historic data on the fund's lending to member countries. Each ball in those cylinders represents $500 million in special drawing rights, and different colors represent different types of lending. You can see the dramatic rise over the last few decades, and also how the fund has introduced new lending vehicles. Most recently, the Resilience and Sustainability Trust, represented by the white balls, to meet new challenges. It's a rise in lending the IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva says she wishes could be reversed.
80 years of the IMF presented in these columns. I am actually dreaming for a time when our members would be doing so well that there would be a decline in the number of balls. Hopefully, at one point, sometime in the future, a decline to 0. But this time is, unfortunately, still far away.
That exhibit shares space this week with another on 80 years of the fund. And that was the backdrop when IMF Today's Golda Lee Bruce spoke with the fund's historian, Rex Ghosh.
So it's said that you can't know where you're going unless you know where you've been. And one person who knows a lot about IMF history and where the IMF has been is fund historian Rex Ghosh. Welcome, Rex.
Thank you.
Jumping right in, we've seen the world, the global economy, weather unexpected shocks in the last couple of years, of course, with IMF support. What can history teach us about how the IMF has supported these countries and the way forward?
Yes, that's a very good question, and particularly, I think, pertinent on the 80th anniversary of the Bretton Woods Conference. So, of course, the world has evolved a lot in the the 80 years since the Bretton Woods Conference. And the fund has had to help countries deal with a series of shocks. In the 1970s, it was the oil price shocks. In the 80s, the debt crisis. In the 90s, it was the transition economies and major financial crises. And then in the 2000s, we had the global financial crisis and most recently the pandemic and a series of shocks since then. And each time the fund has adapted and innovated to help its membership deal with these unprecedented shocks at the time.
And given the changing nature of the global economy, what challenges do you foresee us as a global community having to grapple with in the future?
Well, I think one thing that has changed relative to the past is that, there's more geopolitical fragmentation across the membership, which makes our job more difficult. But it's going to be, similarly helping countries deal with shocks, maybe more frequent global shocks as opposed to idiosyncratic shocks. And we're going to have to keep innovating our processes, our facilities to help countries deal with these.
And tell me a little bit about your own journey. How does one end up as the fund historian? How did that happen?
I'm not sure how that happened, but I will say that the fund puts a lot of emphasis on its history because, we are a learning institution, and I know people roll their eyes when we say that, but it's actually true. And the History Project is a large part of that because we have to learn from our past experience and incorporate those lessons and those insights from history. And that's why the fund has always had its history being written with a sequence of historians.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us,
Thank
Rex,
you.
and for keeping an eye on the past so that we can look clearly forward to the future.
Absolutely. Thank you
so much.
Tomorrow is Saturday, but that doesn't mean these meetings are over. There is a high-level panel on climate change here in the atrium. That's followed by a celebration of the historic establishment of a 25th chair at the IMF Executive Board for Sub-Saharan Africa. First Deputy Managing Director Geeta Gopinath joins the Director of the World Trade Organization, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, for the Per Jacobson Lecture. And then the day wraps up with the Pan-African Women in Leadership Forum. But today does mark the end of our time with you this week. Thanks so much for watching. Feel free to catch up on any episodes of IMF Today you may have missed at imf.org or on YouTube. I'm Amanda Walker. Thanks again for joining us.
The sun is always there. It is only the clouds that come and go. Our founders have left a legacy to see through darker times. And so we will, because we know from them it can be done.